All right, guys. Episode 8 of the Four Lifters by Lifters podcast, and we have my good friend and Penn State champion, Stephen Teeters, with us today. Stephen won, what year was it?
2014.
So in 2014, Stephen won the Collegiate Nationals, which was single ply powerlifting, and he was the first one since I think like 1996 to win a first place. 2 years prior, I got second place, which is the first loser. Uh, so today, we wanted to bring him on to kind of talk about strength training. Steven does a lot of seminars where he visits and learns. He's been powerlifting for 10 years now.
Something like that, yeah.
You were an athlete before that.
Yep.
So he has a pretty extensive background in strength training. I think I was looking up some of your lifts the other day. I think you pulled 700 for 4.
I've pulled 700 for 4, 5 with straps, 725 for a double,
What was your best squat?
755 in competition.
Yeah. And that was knee wraps?
Yes.
Knee wraps. What's your best, like, no knee wraps, like just you and a belt type of squat?
I wouldn't say like a 1 rep is really anything special. I think I've done 675 in No, I did 700 right after the U.S. Open. I bombed out, came back, and I was like, well, I'm going to hit something for all of this. So I did a YOLO single at 700, but I hit 600 for 7 in sleeves, and that was like my most like personal validated lift.
Yeah, I remember being in white building and you squat 600 for 4, and everybody's just like, what the hell is this? Nobody's, in college, like, you don't see anybody load that many
No.
plates on a bar. Not to mention it's they're like they're good bars. The Penn State gyms are outfitted really well, but it's still not like a powerlifting bar where it's meant to hold that kind of weight.
That bar was not holding weight again. It was a U afterward.
So when we dig into training, when I competed, I always thought that when you lift in gear, you kind of tend to migrate towards like conjugate training. When I was running the team out there, I even took the team out to Westside, and we did a visit for a weekend with Louie and some of the guys at Westside. We trained there for the day. We talked for a long time. He taught us a lot of things in a very short period of time, and I did like that style of training. I found it to be very fun.
Yeah, conjugate.
Yeah, conjugate.
Mm-hmm.
But what I see with your training is you've never really trained that way.
No.
And I don't even think you've really even tried, right?
Mm-mm.
So, like, what's the reason behind that?
Intuition. So, like, I actually started with bodybuilding, and I went by how the muscle feels. I just listened to how every single piece moved throughout, like, that session. And then throughout the week, I'd notice, like, okay, I can do legs twice. And that's about where I feel good. If I do it 3 times, I start to break down. But, like, I never did speed. I just kept trying to get bigger and stronger, like, really power building kind of style. And it was always to be as strong as possible at the weight that I was at while getting as big as possible simultaneously.
Okay. But don't you think that they're, like, looking back at your training, you've gone through a lot of injuries throughout your time. Do you think that there's any, like, looking back, do you think there's any validation to that style of training? And do you think that would have been or could have prevented some of the things that you went through?
Oh my God. Any formal style would have been better for injuries than what I did. That was like, I basically read from like Flex magazines, and I took that bodybuilding style and then went really heavy. And I think if even like a freaking Mad Cow 5x5,
I did really well in Mad Cow.
yeah, most
Really
people
well.
do. Like,
So I went into Penn State, and again, more bodybuilding style training like you. So I did the Mad Cow Advanced, like the 9-week peaking program.
Yep.
But I didn't know. They just told me to run like 5x5, and that's the one that the spreadsheet that popped up when I Googled it, and that's what I downloaded and I did. And I went from like, I don't know, maybe 315 for 5, or I think I had a max 405 squat at that point, and within 9 weeks I was doing 405 for 5 sets of 5.
jeez.
Yeah, like my body responded so well to frequency because I was such a noob still. And
Yep.
even though like I thought I was advanced because I had a 400-pound squat, but my body
Yeah.
reacted so well to that frequency. To this day, I still tell people, if you're within your first 3 years of lifting, do that program, and it'll teach you so much just about your body and how important it is to do multiple times a week that same movement.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's just muscle learning.
Yeah. But as far as like conjugate goes, there's we're talking about diet before this and how every time you try something you learn. One thing that I learned about conjugate is that it may not have to be so black and white with like ME, DE days. It may not have to be traditional. When I did that program throughout college, me and Burke, we used to call it Burkside.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's almost 10 years ago now. But when I did that program, I actually did linear waves within the movements because I needed to get good at the movement before I could push myself. So if I had a variation of a movement, for example, let's say we're doing box squats to 130 pounds of tension, right? It took me 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks to get good at that, and then that fourth week I could just go balls out and really try to hit some good numbers,
like a real max effort.
Yeah, but that taught me something too. Is like if you're doing something new, don't try to go all the way.
Oh god, no.
Because your body's just not going to handle it. But was there? I mean, when you look at powerlifting, like you still think of conjugate, especially when we were younger. You see the videos of Gene Richlack, benching, and he has the skull cap and all that stuff.
Rest
like,
in peace.
Yeah, there was no drive for you to go that way.
None. I just loved what bodybuilders looked like, and like I grew up in a super blue collar area, and it's all about like being strong, and if it's not functional, you're just like you're a mere muscle.
Yeah.
And like I remember my brother saying that stuff. Like I will not forget it. No, those are show muscles. And I was like, nah, these aren't going to be show muscles. So I just wanted to get as muscular as possible and try to be as strong in that frame as I could. And where I was before Penn State, I had no idea what West Side was. Like it's not like Instagram where you look and there's like 1,000 different things to see, and there's just this massive amount of information. Like it was really hard to access that stuff.
So, what I've always noticed with your training is that I would say it feels like always like 65 to 75% of your workload is on the core movement.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's numerous times where we would train together, and we would mainly squat, walk around the gym for a little bit, might do a hamstring curl or something, and we would stretch and go home.
Yeah.
Like, so do you think that those core movements are largely attributed to the physique that you had? I mean, you've always held a lot of muscle, especially like, when you were competing 181s, like you're small. Anybody that's 181 pounds is small. But afterwards, you really blew up. Like you have a big frame, and even now that you haven't been training due to injury as much, but you're still wide. And it's just the amount of time spent on the core lifts.
Yeah, it's from the compound movements, like squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, and maybe pull up or barbell row. One of those. Every single workout, even now, I still put them in there because I want to get as much bang for my buck as I can. And if I have 30 minutes to train, I want to make sure that I get a good bit out of that 30 minutes. So I can do 1 OHP, I can do a little giant set, and I can get out. Yeah. And I actually got something that I'm going to be able to keep my muscle. I'm going to still have a decent physique because I had to work hard during that time frame. And frankly, I can't do anything below 100 miles an hour. So like compound movements are perfect for that.
Fair. I mean, your intensity when you lift, you're able to, laugh, and then 2 seconds later, like I feel like you see red and you could kill somebody.
Just that.
Yeah, and you just turn it on. You have this crazy high intensity, and you just put it all on the bar, which is it's impressive.
It's fun.
Yeah. So I want to dig on a little bit of like variation. Even though your training doesn't say that you do a ton of variation because your focus is always on the compound movement, but what's your stance on variation?
It depends on for who.
Yeah.
So with the people that I train who are a little more of an average lifter, they work the 9 to 5, they're not ever looking to compete. have a lot of variation in there, and that's so that they don't get hurt doing the same movement over and over again. They're probably not going to be intentful enough.
Are you talking about like wear and tear on the joints?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can take on a lot of mileage whenever you're not performing the compound lifts well. And let's face it, even your regular Joe, they like to push themselves. They like to feel strong. They like to feel capable. I don't know anyone that doesn't. But the variation allows them to work everything that might not be getting hit with proper technique. So if you squat well, you're going to use pretty much every muscle in your body. If you're not, there's a good chance you're taking your adductors entirely out of the equation.
So when you talk about variation for an average Joe, are you talking about 1 week they might squat, 1 week they might leg press, one
Even
week
like
they
split
might
squats, yeah.
or okay, but you're not just talking about like squat variations.
No,
Okay.
like I think of it now in terms of like lower push, lower pull,
Okay.
upper push, upper pull, and then you've got your isolations from there. And that's actually how I write out my base templates, and then I just kind of plug and chug from there. But that seems to keep people in one piece, and they feel like they don't get bored as easily either. But like your athletes, I think that your variation is going to be very limited. So like if you watch Joe Sullivan lift, he's certainly doing things that he's not putting on the camera. Like he knows more than almost anyone I've ever met. But
Crazy strong guy.
oh, good God, yeah. But like you'll see SSB, you'll see a regular back squat, high bar variance, pause variance. Like there's just so many different ways that he has to now squat so that he also does not get hurt. You have to train that specific lift so that it can continue to get stronger, because if you're not working towards your specificity, as you know, it's like probably, in my opinion, probably the most important variable for your training success. If you're not doing that, you won't succeed. But if you just continue to squat and squat and squat, you're going to have like compression problems. Your scapula are going to be just jacked up. Like you'll find XYZ problem very fast.
I think the biggest issue with doing the same movement week in and week out is not being able to fully listen to your body.
Yeah.
So if something's tight, but you have, let's say you normally work up to 400 pounds. This week you're going to do 400 and you're hoping to do, 10 reps.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe you worked outside for the entire day before, your body's a little tight, and you're not quite listening to that. But because you're constantly coming in doing the same movement over and over again, you're still pushing for that number, but you don't realize you're slightly out of position.
Yeah.
So when you're slightly out of position, maybe the bar's a little forward, right? So your hips pop, and now you're trying to good morning the bar up and your back's bent. And that's almost every time when I see injuries happen, is because they're trying to do the same thing over and over again, and they're unable to fully listen to their body.
Yeah, they get into really bad patterns. And that's, like you said, you nailed it to a T. If you're just doing the same movement, you will have that overuse pattern that becomes an overuse injury. Like Kabuki talks about how there's not any one specific position that is actually inherently bad. It's just the one that you're in the most. So,
Fair.
Yeah.
As far as like maybe percentage of risk to injury?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a power lifter and you want to be a strength athlete, let's say, right now it's June, July. Let's say you have a meet at the end of December. Are you pressing every week?
Yeah. Wait, you mean like pressing?
Barbell.
Okay,
Yeah, barbell
not like pushing.
Yeah,
Okay.
barbell pressing.
This far out, I would say beginner and intermediate, yes. Very experienced level lifter, maybe. But like you're doing close grip, you're doing spotos, you're still working that muscle group. You still have a barbell in your hand, but I don't think you're exclusively doing the bench press, because you've already grown it for 10 years. You have to grow other things in order to get that last 0.25% out of your lift.
And on an advanced lifter, a 0.25% could be 10, 15 pounds.
Yeah, it's
That's
massive.
like when we were talking last night about Ryan. The difference between his 600-pound bench and his 625 is a world record.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. That's a
And
small
that could be
percentage.
3 years.
Yeah.
Like that's what's really hard about becoming like that. Well, frankly, now Joe Sullivan, Ben Polak, those kind of guys, is It might take 3 years for you to hit a PR.
So the reason why I wanted to bring that up is I've always found that bodybuilders are freakishly strong. And I think it's undervalued how strong these guys are. And not everybody. You know, there's some guys out there that are, high PED, and they just try to hit the stimulus mark where they can grow and train every day. And, there's guys like that. But there's still a lot of bodybuilders that are just crazy strong. I remember seeing like 212 guys. Maybe they're, 220 in training, and they're benching, 4 or 5 for 12 reps. Like, it's an unbelievable number, right?
You don't see powerlifters doing that, really.
You don't see powerlifters doing it. So if these guys are stronger, arguably, obviously, maybe the best 220 guy is stronger than that. But if these guys in general are stronger, don't you have to draw the line and say that their training is better?
That's a really, really well thought out and good question. I think it depends on the lift. So I don't see many bodybuilders that squat, bench, and deadlift exceptionally well. I would say you see them probably squat and bench, or bench and deadlift, two of the three, but they only have that one freak show lift. And when it comes to becoming that top 1% of a power lifter, you have to have all three. That's why you can pull 1,000 pounds, but like Jamal, what's his name?
Jamal B.
Like
15 or something.
I know his
crazy
damn
strong.
handle.
Yeah, I know.
Like, oh my god,
dude, it's 2020. It's where we're at.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But like, he pulls $1,000, but he didn't become the number one until he could also squat 8. You can't go 6, $1,000, 4.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have all three, and I don't know that there's many bodybuilders that could do all three that way.
Let's segue into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So, when I see somebody who's a good deadlifter, automatically, like, I try not to spend too much time on Instagram, but if I see something where like there's somebody with a freakishly good deadlift, I automatically go through their profile to see their bench. They don't post it.
Yep.
Why is that?
Ego.
But why is somebody all right, but why is somebody good at deadlifting and not bench pressing?
I mean, now we're getting into I think there's leverages. That's the most obvious part of that, but there's also psychology.
So what makes, leverage-wise, what makes somebody a good deadlifter and maybe not a good bench presser?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and really helpful if you're just starting out, so that you're not demoralized that you're really good at deadlifting, but you suck at bench pressing.
It was opposite for me.
Yeah, I was deadlift. It was nice, but then I couldn't bench a lot, so it didn't look great. It comes down to like limb length. So a really good deadlifter, I'm sure the first spot that you look to is, where are those fingertips at? Are they like right just below like their hip bone, or are they like down getting towards their knees, like got some monkey arms going on? Because like, they're gonna be a 6, 7, 800 pound deadlifter, and oh yeah, it's a 98 pound chick. Not really, but yeah, you get the idea. Versus like,
so that same long arm is beneficial in the deadlift, and you're saying it's detrimental in the bench press?
Yeah, like it's not a death sentence. Oh my god, I only know handles. Dr. Deadlift.
Yeah, I don't know his name.
Caleb
Okay.
Dunwooler. Pulled a grand sumo, something ridiculous, but he's also benching 500 pounds now. And now.
Yeah.
When he started, it was not his good lift, but that distance that you have to travel is really the ultimate factor. It's when I go down to get the bar, yeah, I don't have to stand up with the bar very far for the deadlift, versus when I'm pressing, I have to go from, 1 meter whole way through versus like 0.6 meter for like a big barrel chest, short arm kind of guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really leverages and how far you have to move the bar. There's an obvious extra thing there too. I wasn't sure if you're going to take that bait or not.
No, go ahead, take it.
Positioning.
Yeah,
and that comes with experience. So like knowing, all right, I do have long arms. Do I feel better as my hands are more narrow and maybe I can get a little more tricep, or do I feel really good out wide and I can shorten the distance of that bar?
So you're talking about the distance of the bar path,
Mm-hmm.
and that is definitely something that comes into play with the deadlift, right?
Yeah.
And you're a long arm person that tends to be good at the deadlift. But to me, my biggest problem in the deadlift is having my hips in a position to be able to push off the floor with crazy emphasis. Okay? And what I see is that somebody with longer arms is able to position their low back and their rear in a better, more powerful position than I can.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily attribute it to the range of motion rather than the positioning.
I think they almost go hand in hand, and it's just a matter of which way you want to look at it. Like, you have a different leverage, so you can get into a different position. Like, their hips can start higher, and most people can pull really well with their back right out of the gate. If you got that long arm, you're in a perfect position to just milk that.
Yeah.
Versus if you have to squat down to the bar to reach it, you're going to have to literally squat the bar, and that's not how you're going to finish a deadlift well. You're probably going to end up hitching as soon as it gets heavy. So it's range of motion, positioning. They go, I think it's really hard to separate those two.
Okay. So just talking about the deadlift, one thing that I noticed, when I was young, I was like 18 or 19, I was like a couple months into deadlifting. Everybody starts out Planet Fitness, right? So I did the Planet Fitness thing for a little bit. I maxed out the 60-pound dumbbells.
Nice.
And you move on, and I was at the YMCA, and that's the guy who, there's an old guy that worked there, and he's the guy that actually got me into powerlifting. So he's in the background of my first 500-pound deadlift, and it is atrocious. But I was only 2 months into deadlifting.
Yeah.
And I deadlifted 500. It was almost all back, but from there, I didn't go up further. And to me, I think the reason why is I didn't focus on the positioning of the lower back at the start of the lift. That's what I attribute it to, because when you get to a certain point, you can't finish the lift.
Yes.
And that has a lot to do with your starting position in the deadlift.
Yeah. So I think I know where you're getting at then. And from having coached so many different people with so many different leverages, where the low back is in the deadlift is a consequence of where the shoulders are. So if you're thinking about, we're going to go to a little physics class here for a minute. You're thinking about some dotted lines from the shoulder and the bar. If you lean over that bar, here's my shoulder. I've got my hand tilted over top of it because I guess you're listening, so there's no way you can see that. But when your shoulders are in front of the bar, you've created this extra crank that you have to pull out of that low back. And so your low back may seem like the thing that isn't in position, but it's really that you're over top of the bar, instead, like really leaning over it instead of directly in line with your shoulders right on it, not behind, because you're going to fall backward and you're going to squat it up, not in front, or else you're just going to pull with your low back and it's going to be atrocious. It has to be right in line. And so, like, we teach people stack theory or joint by joint, and you're trying to get all those joints lined up. That way you're in a good position. So it's not just the low back. If the low back's out, something else is too. It's always a give and take, and it's like stealing range of motion from one place or stealing positioning from one place.
But some of that will have to do with leverages too, right?
Yeah.
So it all kind of plays into effect. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say it, but I didn't figure out my deadlift until I started squatting the bar. And I know it's not ideal, but
it can work for you though.
But it worked for me.
Yep.
And you know what? 10 years of deadlifting the other way wasn't working. And one day, I just loaded on 585 and I put it for, a single, but it was just, it clicked. Like, it felt good. And most importantly, I didn't feel any, like, torsion on my spine.
Yeah, that's the most important part. And, like, I'm going to throw this out there because it's really important. It's something that I would like to kind of tackle from where I'm from in Central PA. Like, we don't have coaches, really. Like, there's not access.
No, just everybody's strong.
We're pretty corn-fed. But that gets into, like, breathing and bracing. And your positioning will feel infinitely better as you have pressure in your abdomen to keep that spine straight. Because if there's enough pressure, you can try and pull the bar however you want, but you can really only move in one certain way to reach the bar for your leverages. And if you're not braced, you can do it almost any way and pull with whatever muscle you got, which, well, let's see if we're going to have to edit this out or not, but Dustin called it muscle fucking it.
Muscle
And,
fucking,
yeah. And
100%.
I was a great muscle fucker. Like,
Yeah.
it was fun. It was easy. I'm like, wow, this hurts. That must be right. And then I'm 29 and I feel like I'm 50. It wasn't right. You breathe and brace. You can't do that. You have to get into one position, and it's because there's so much pressure in your belly that your spine's not going to bend to accommodate.
So are you big on a belt? Because it increases core pressure, if you know how to use it properly?
If you know how to use it, yeah. I actually like to learn to brace without it. For newbies, I think it's really good because you have that external cue. Mm-hmm. So you can feel something that you're pressing out on versus like, press my stomach out? What do you mean? Yeah. Like, people have no idea what that's like until like the first time they put a belt on. They're like, oh, I can push into this. You're like, yes, there's something that, oh, okay, now I get it. There's a physical cue.
I pull better without one.
Do you squat better without one?
No.
Yeah, so it just depends on the lift. Like, Yuri Belkin pulls beltless.
Does he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
He's a master at his craft.
Yeah. It's gross, beautiful, whatever you want to call it.
So while we're still on deadlifts, you got to answer the question: sumo or conventional?
Oh God! Like, the first four things that come to my mind are like wildly inappropriate and have nothing to do with the actual question. Again, limb length. So if you have no rotation at your hips, you should probably pull conventional. If you've got a little bit of a wider, it's called a Q angle, like women might be a little bit better with it. Sumo's probably a little bit better for you. Either way, if you're going to deadlift shitty, pull conventional because you're going to drop the bar, and like, you can jack up so much by deadlifting sumo wrong. And you can do that with conventional too, but A, you're going to hold on to the bar because your back's in a better position to work and you're not relying on your legs. But I would say build your conventional when you're starting. Sumo, as you get a little bit older, you might find that it's a little nicer on your hips. But really, if you're going to get good at it, I think sumo is easier on you, at least for me.
But your squat positioning is wider. It's very balanced. I'm always a big fan of 90-degree angles.
Mm-hmm.
So when
How human of you.
Yeah, crazy. I wasn't very good at geometry either. But when I look at somebody's squat, and I know everybody his squat's different. You can't bring a uniform approach to teaching somebody to squat, the bench, the deadlift. But for general basis, I like to look at 90-degree angles, and I find that if you're able to get your feet out there and still maintain pretty good angles, like, I can't get my feet that wide for a sumo deadlift and not have my knees kind of caving over the bar. There's a lot of muscles that are tight, so what ends up happening is I really have a wide stance conventional deadlift.
Yep.
And I see that a lot with guys that pull sumo, and they're like, oh yeah, sumo is great, but if you look, the first thing I do is I'm weird, so I'll do a screen record, and I'll do their conventional deadlift, and I'll do a collage of their sumo deadlift, and I'll look at back positioning. Now, to me, one cue that always sticks with me on the sumo deadlift is nuts to the bar.
Yep.
Okay, and you're almost in like a dancing plie movement, I guess you would say, and
nice.
So. But you have to be, because that bar path is really really straight up.
It's vertical.
Yeah. And there's really no swing motion with it at all, which you may find with a conventional deadlift. Not that you should, but you may find it. And I just wasn't able to execute that correctly. So those people should just stay away from sumo deadlifting.
Yeah, like, I hate to reduce it to that, but if it hurts, no matter what you do and you can't get into a position, either stop doing it or go to someone that actually knows how to do it and ask them what they're doing. Like, you even got a cue that most people don't know. Put your nuts on the bar. Good old Dave Tate. Yeah. Like, teabag the bar. You open as wide as you can and you try to sit down onto it, essentially. Sumo's so much more technical. And because of that, that's why I say if you're a newer lifter, you should probably start with conventional. You have to learn like how to actively pull yourself onto the bar. And it's like doing a squat with no weight, but you're trying to act as if 500 is on there to get you down there. It's very odd to describe it. It's so technical that if you don't do it right, you should really just stick to conventional.
Can we kind of generalize it? Is that a word? I don't know. I think it's a word.
Generalize?
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah. Huh. Can we typically say like somebody who squats with a wider stance and they're more comfortable is probably gonna do better at sumo deadlifting?
More likely,
or
yeah.
or hack squats with a wider stance. Whatever it is. Like if their comfort position is wider, they'll typically be better at sumo deadlifting.
Yeah, I would say that's a safe generalization, particularly like if you watch how people walk. Some people got that duck foot.
Mm-hmm.
Your hips
Are opened up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So guess what? You're probably going to love just bloop right down onto that bar, and you're ready to pull. If your feet are even a little bit, is that pigeon-toed? Is that what that is? Like they're in a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
For today it is.
Yeah, sounds great. Then conventional is probably going to be the way to go because your hips are just not going to like that rotation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to look at it.
Yeah, I start to pick up on those things on myself. Like I don't have a wide squat anymore, and I pull better conventional, so it just kind of clicks for me.
Your feet are like straight
Yeah.
when you squat. I was like, wow, my adductors and hip flexors would be wrecked. But like if you turned them out, your ass would probably be just destroyed, like your upper hip.
Yeah, and that's almost always where my injuries are.
What do you know?
Yeah. All right, so we talked a little bit about bracing and belts. When do you think somebody should add a belt in their training, as far as like from just starting out to being advanced? Like, where is that implemented for you?
So I wait. I personal train and coach for a living, and I wait until they ask about a belt.
Okay.
Because if you haven't even thought of it, you probably don't need it. Now, the moment you ask about it, there's probably a little bit of time left, unless you've been like looking at Instagram and you're like, yo, Larry Wheels is really cool.
He's wearing a belt. I need a belt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's bullshit. But if all of a sudden you're like, my back's pretty fatigued. Is there anything I can do about that? But like, so there's this thing called a belt.
So you relate it to fatigue?
Yes. As your quads, your hams, your glutes get stronger and stronger, yes, your core can get stronger with them to a point, but humans were meant to run long distances. Like, we evolved so that we could hunt a mammoth and it would sweat to death, overheat, and die. Not put 700 pounds on our back and squat it for one. Like, we were meant for a long activity, not a short, heavy one.
Okay.
So at a certain point, those muscles in your lower back and your core, they're going to get really tired. And when that happens, you need to mitigate that fatigue with something. So I think a belt's probably the safest way to do it. And it's literally like adding an extra layer of your core to protect your spine.
Okay. So let's say you're a 500-pound squatter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you want to hit 455 for your top set, and your top set goal is 3 reps. Okay, where are you implementing a belt as you're warming up and getting ready to hit that 455?
So super generally, probably 80% of my goal for the day. So if I'm looking at 455, maybe like 3 1/4, 365, I'd put on a belt, hit it for a single, and then go 405 for a single, 455 for 3.
Okay.
But usually 80%. That way you're warming up everything, not just, hey, I got my belt. You don't want to become dependent on it.
Yeah.
But 70-80% of your training value for that day, if you're planning on it being belted.
Yeah, I think there's a psychological effect to it. For me, when I put on a belt, it tells me like, okay, I'm serious, because I train beltless.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using a belt when I lift with Ryan, just to try to keep up, because I am stronger with one. But for the better part of 3 years, I really haven't used a belt. I don't feel like I need it. I don't feel like my training style warrants it, and I want to put more emphasis, me personally, on building my low back through these movements.
Yeah.
But when I am dialing something in for a top set, I want the movement to be very similar to how that top set's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And my movement with a belt, whether it doesn't seem like much, is different than my movement without one.
For sure.
So, you practice how you play.
Yep.
So at 365, it would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then 405, you're going to take it a little bit more seriously.
Yep.
You're really going to focus on your breathing, your walkouts, stabilizing the bar, and then you have your top. So you would say that that's normal?
I'd say that's a safe average of what you'd see. The biggest thing is you don't want to become psychologically dependent on that belt where, I'm safe. Because you can actually load at a certain point. It's like straps. You can get a super physiological load by adding that belt. You're literally adding extra muscle is what your body thinks it is to stabilize your spine.
So you could almost consider training with a belt and without a belt different variations of a movement?
I actually program beltless versus belted.
Okay.
And I think it's because it does accrue so much more fatigue without the support. Or, you know what I mean there.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of training movements that I suck at.
Mm-hmm.
So if at one point I was really good at belted squats, I was really bad without one, and that's really when I went, okay, I don't need the belt anymore, and I'm gonna get good without it. But like certain movements, like dips, I wasn't very good at, and then when I was able to bench over 400 pounds, I was doing 3 plates for 4 sets of 15. Because I hyper focus on being bad at something, and I want to be good at it. And then once I get good at it, especially if it's an accessory movement, I trash it. And I don't do it anymore, and I move to something else that I'm bad at, like overhead pressing, and I focus on that until I'm good at that, and then I trash it, and I keep moving on.
And it's sort of like why you need variation as you get more and more advanced. Like I got to the point when I could squat 500 pounds that I could also good morning 500 pounds. It's really
crazy.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was ugly. Don't get me wrong. This is before we filmed anything, so
you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nobody knows this. You got to take me.
Still, I mean, just to be in that position and move the weight the way to move that kind of weight is just impressive.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
The takeaway there is, all right, this is no longer translating to my squat. So I need something that's going to give me less fatigue that I suck at, probably. And let's say it's a stiff leg. I now have to do 225 for 3 sets of 10 instead of 500 for a set of 3. I can do that more often, build more hamstring, and get more into my squat than if I kept trying to get my good morning to 550, because it's probably going to get there before my squat is.
Yeah. So while we're on equipment, before we deviate too far, knee wraps or sleeves?
Are you competing or no? I mean, if you're not, sleeves. Knee wraps have not been proven to be safer, and that's what you've always...
Safer in the joint?
Yeah.
Or safer in general because you're lifting more weight?
Both.
Okay.
So for both the knee, the hip, and the spine, because you're able to load much more weight on the bar, particularly, I think a lot of people aren't necessarily using knee wraps for a complete depth squat, so you can really load weight on that bar if you're only doing like a 3/4 squat, but that's a lot of compression. So I think for the most part, if you're going to use sleeves, wraps, if you're not competing in powerlifting and you're not competing at wraps, why even put them on? Sure, you could do it as like a training variation to get to hold more weight on the bar.
It could be like an overload technique, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just like a slingshot.
Yep. Okay.
But otherwise, sleeves all the way. Purist. I think there is nothing like putting a big-ass weight on your back, going down to the hole, and not knowing if you can get that back up, and then doing it for 6. With no wraps, no support.
So it's just you and the bar type of thing.
Yeah, and sleeves I don't feel like takes away from that. It's like a heavy sock.
Okay, so when I think of knee wraps, I think that the purpose of a knee wrap is to obviously to compress the knee. And there's a difference between how bodybuilders use knee wraps and powerlifters use knee wraps.
Yes.
So in powerlifting, we wrap the knee so tight that, sometimes our skin will actually bleed from how tight the wraps are.
Yeah.
Actually, we would chalk them to make sure that they don't even slide. But bodybuilders will wrap looser, and they do it as more of a support, a comfort. It's kind of like that kid in Charlie Brown with the blanket. It's just
Oh
it
yeah.
just makes them feel good,
Yeah.
and so that way it's something one less thing that they have to worry about when they're trying to do maybe a big drop set on squats or
Yes.
leg press or something like that. But to me, the purpose of wrapping a knee in anything to do with strength is to allow your body to sit back further. Okay, so I've always noticed that I have more hamstring activation when I wrap my knees. And that, to me, that's the reason why I'm able to lift more, is because my positioning has now changed. Not necessarily because of the compression of the knee to give you a rubber band effect. It
Yes.
does, but I also think the rubber band effect is from loading the hamstrings further. And I think that's why if you look at powerlifters that mainly lift in gear, their quads tend to be smaller, but their hamstrings are massive.
Massive.
Yeah.
Their hamstrings, their rectors.
Yeah.
Yep, that posterior chain.
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there is the way that you wrap it. And I've been in powerlifting so long that my bias is towards thinking about knee wraps for a powerlifter. So I'm thinking about cranking that thing down on there. But like I'm thinking about
We used to have a guy on the team. He was the biggest guy on the team at the time, and his purpose was to wrap our knees. He didn't compete.
oh god.
Yeah.
You had like a rap ogre.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you think about like Branch Warren and Johnny Jackson in those old like videos, they'd have like it was probably Gasp that made their raps or something. I don't know. Something
for
like
sure.
that. But they would wrap them for like hack squats. And you say you're able to sit back in that hack squat. That makes a lot of sense. And I think if you know what you're doing, this is just like the deadlift sumo versus conventional. If you know what you're doing, wrap that knee up because there's also a psychological factor just like the belt.
Well, I think keeping everything in its place is really important on these heavy sets. I mean, those guys were crazy strong. I mean, Johnny Jackson and Stan Efferding were the strongest, pro bodybuilders of all time, and they were even like competing against each other in touring for bodybuilding shows and stuff. But keeping that knee aligned when you have 5, 6, 7 plates on a hack squat can be really important for safety, and it takes the mind out of it, so you're not worrying about it.
Yes.
So you can just crank on the muscle.
Well, and like you even mentioned like they'll keep it on for that drop set.
Yeah.
The amount of fatigue in the muscle is one thing. The amount of fatigue in your mind is completely different. I like to train drop sets with people so they become more resilient. Like you
Put some hair on their chest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do something hard when it feels shitty, and the next time you have to do that, it feels less shitty.
So, that's an interesting thing. We have a lot of different customers that come through our doors, so I get to meet a lot of people. You can always tell when somebody's training intensity is not up to par. I feel like, especially if you're younger, you can kind of get away with a crappier diet. You can get away with a little less sleep. But you can still look and be pretty strong if your training intensity is high.
Yes.
And as you get older, that intensity becomes more difficult because you become more scared. Your body hurts more, especially if you're doing labor for a living. But do you think that that's kind of like the end-all, be-all in getting results in fitness?
Intensity? I think really close. I think it's intent.
Intent.
Yeah, so having a purpose to what you're doing. Because, like, and I can't make this statement with a great amount of validity because I'm about to bring up Mike Israel. He trains, like, super specifically RPE style, this many reps shy of failure, this is how often. And he's got it to, like, a robot type of math. He even has books on it now. When you don't have that intensity, are you still going to get that strong? Are you still going to get that amount of value? Or are you just kind of inflating the muscle to a certain point? Like,
so I think both concepts work, but I also think that that's why people are so dependent on PEDs.
Yeah.
Is because the stimulus becomes much lower when you
for
have
the activation.
Yeah. And you can get away with less intensity and more frequency.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it'd keep you healthier longer too.
It could.
Arguably.
Let's keep going on that. I've always, we'll get your take on it first. How important do you think it is for people to build a strong natty base?
Oh, good God. If you hop on PEDs and you're going to notice I'm really big on the psychology of all these things as well. But if you hop on PEDs first thing, you're never going to know how hard it is to gain muscle, to gain strength, like over a 5, 6 year, 7 year span where you only put 100 pounds on a lift versus when you get on a PED and you could have been training for 10 years. Then you put in 1 year from there, you put 100 pounds on that lift. That is not the same. Now take that PED away. How shitty does it feel to gain 5 pounds on your squat in a year? How likely do you think you are to stick with it?
Yeah. This is such a weighted topic for me because I don't know if anybody is ever ready for PEDs, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're 100% necessary, in strength sport either, because you have guys that you can argue that the USAPL is not drug free. You can say whatever you want, but ultimately they're drug tested, and that's the closest we're gonna get in finding natural strength sport.
No doubt.
Right? Like we can't do much more, at least not cost effectively, and so the argument is that like the USAPL always just throws away their drug tests. They don't even do them, or at least back in the day they didn't. But ultimately, this is the most we can do to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
But if you can't figure out why you need to sleep, why you need to, for strength, we have to make sure that we're constantly fueled. And not just fueled for performance, but fueled for recovery. And those are two different things. But there's a lot of small details in that.
Yeah.
Like, I found that when I was in college, zinc and magnesium, when I took that before I went to bed, I slept like a freaking baby. I slept 8 hours. I woke up, I felt amazing, and I went on with my day. When I was really getting close to nationals, I would force myself to take a 1 hour nap throughout the day, as well as my 8 hours of sleep, okay, on top of easily 5,000-6,000 calories. But you have to micromanage things more. Now, if you're at like an average amount of strength and you decide to put PEDs into your regimen, when you want to get stronger, the only thing you know how to do is add more PEDs.
Yeah.
Okay, and that leads down a really dark path of dependency. And my biggest fear in a lot of people using PEDs is they were never anything without them.
Yep.
And they're not going to figure out how to take it to the next level with them.
Yep. And, there's a really big conversation that's kind of been like, I want to say like 30 years in the making, and more of like the health, nutrition, medicine side of this, and it's with liposuction.
Okay.
The incidence of people regaining their weight after, oh my God, liposuction, gastric bypass. Wow. Sorry. So after gastric bypass, the incidence of people gaining all that weight back is absolutely enormous. It's because they don't have the skills to continue at that body weight and continue to thrive. And a PED is the same thing. It's like you only need a handgun, but you were only taught how to throw a grenade. Like,
Yeah.
like it's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the skills to back that up, then you are using the wrong tool for where you are at. And it's a tool. That's the thing.
I always find that the guys that are the most successful in the top level of strength sports, and typically the top levels are untested. So whether they're using stuff or not, it doesn't matter. They're lifting in untested feds. But they almost all have a great track record of competing naturally.
Yes.
The bodybuilders, the powerlifters,
Both.
the strongman guys, they all have a great track record. And most of them have an athletic background too, but they learned how to micromanage the details so they're not dependent on the PEDs.
Yeah.
And maybe you need a certain amount to get to that, Mr. Olympia or, the number one powerlifter or strongman in the world. I don't know. I'm never going to get to that level, so I'll never, I'll never really know. But yeah, I just wanted to get your take on that because I think it's something that largely is overlooked. Do you think that there's like a general time that people should, if they're going to consider it, like there's certain markers that they need to meet?
So I know how you're asking this, and the way that I see it probably isn't looking at the same marker that you are. And I would fact check me on this because I haven't looked this up in a while, but your endocrine system. it essentially finishes forming when you're about 26 as a male.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably a little younger as a female. I'm not sure. Women tend to develop a little bit faster.
Especially mentally.
Yeah, that'd be a lot faster. But the age of 26. So whenever you're taking testosterone, whenever you're using PEDs, I'm using like anabolics and androgenics for this conversation. People don't usually mean caffeine as a PED whenever they're having this talk. If you allow that endocrine system to completely form, there's, at least from what I've read and what I've gathered over the years, less of a risk of infertility. There's less of a risk psychologically, because like some of those drugs can really they can jack you up. Like you got to be pretty real about it. But letting your body form first and then adulterating it, like I don't know. I don't think there's a whole lot of things that you would throw a major growth factor into before the structure is done growing.
Yeah. Yeah, and to compound on that, the people that build these strong bases tend to not fluctuate when they do, if they were to decide to take PEDs. So, and of course you're going to get stronger or recover better when you take them. But when you have somebody who can only bench, let's say 300 pounds, and they want to take PEDs, right? So they might get big, they might bench 400 pounds, and they're huge, they took Anadrol, their face is all puffy, and, they got the acne going, and, they lose their hair like me. But
at 16.
Yeah. You're blessed with good things and bad. But those guys, when they stop taking this stuff, they're back down to a 300-pound bench. They're back down in body weight. They don't look like they lift anymore, like just how they were when they started. So I've always found that the guys that built that natty base and really understood what they were doing and why prior to taking PEDs, just A, they're healthier when they do it, and B, they just don't have these crazy fluctuations. And when they do spend time being naturally after taking PEDs, they still look like they lift. They still look good. They have a great base still, and they're able to continue building even though they're natural at that point in their life.
Yes. Would you want to build your house without a foundation or with one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess we'll have to dip off the PEDs there. It's just this is probably like the 6th podcast that we've talked about PEDs, and I just don't understand why the majority of people take them.
They don't either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an absolutely 100% fair point. I always think it's interesting when people take drugs that were designed for horses, and they have 2 months in the gym.
Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like it's a serious thing. Like, longevity is king in the sport, which is another thing. Like, I've always found, I think the Mr. Olympia age range tends to be like 40 to 45.
Yeah, it's a good bit older
because you need that muscle maturity. And same thing with powerlifting. I mean, I think when Donnie Thompson broke the record, he was 42.
I don't know exactly, but he was around his 40s.
Yeah, and it just took that long for him to get there.
I think also a lot of 17, 18, 19-year-olds, like, I mean, hell, we were probably just like this. I know I was. We wanted that world record, and it's probably to prove that, we're worthy of something, or, let's not go too far down this bullshit rabbit hole. But whenever you're 35, 40 years old, you've lived long enough to understand what it takes to accomplish something like this, and you've laid more bricks than that 19-year-old even knew existed.
Yeah.
You've failed with more bricks than that 19-year-old even knew existed. And that's why it takes that long to get to that point.
Yeah, I think a lot of young guys want the notoriety. They want the limelight. They don't want it for themselves.
No.
And especially with social media, you want people to clap for you.
Yep.
And it does play a psychological effect. But let's segue and dip into there's different ways to overload your training, right? So you can overload in weight.
Yep.
You can overload in I guess you would say you could technically do it with like speed, right? Like you can measure it.
Oh, yes, yes.
In the speed of the lift,
Yep.
right? You can decrease rest time. That would be a way to kind of overload your training in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have range of motion, which is another way
Yes.
to overload your training. What's your take on those? Where do you tend to lead with your clients and yourself?
So, I don't know. I was counting
Yeah, I
as you
think
said
there's
this.
4. Yeah.
I've broken it down with actually like, I think she's 70 years old, this client that I have. And we came up with 6 different intensity techniques.
You know, if she's 60, she's gonna kill you.
Oh, she's 60.
See?
75. Jesus,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, she's pretty cool to learn from. I get to teach her powerlifting and learn like everything else, which is really cool. But we came up with, I think it was 6 at the time, and you hit 4 of the big ones: range of motion, overall weight, decrease rest time. What was the other one you used there? Volume's another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be, I think, to be fair, we can call that tonnage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
That'd
it's
be
measurable.
Yes, easier way to put it. I think they all come in. I don't remember the 2 off the top of my head right now. I have a list somewhere at home. But they all come in at different times. And this is just like changing your variant.
Yeah.
And it's all right. I've done enough weight on the bar, but I can't breathe well going up the steps. Well, now you have a different weakness keeping you from your ultimate goal, whether it be muscle building, fat loss, or strength. It's all this give and take cycle, and knowing this is the one I haven't done. This is now where I need to go. So you've done weight on the bar. Now it's probably time to go to rest time. That way you can get more of a stimulus from less of a stimulator.
Okay.
And the more that you can do with less, the longer you're going to be in this game.
Fair. I really wanted you to dig into range of motion. And
okay.
So, yeah, for those of you guys listening, right now, Steven hasn't been having the best of training lately because he has a torn pec. He's got a nice incision scar here, and he did that through increasing the range of motion on a max effort bench press. And when I say max effort, it was a true 1-rep max. Or at the time, like that was a 90-95% movement, right?
Yeah.
So it was pretty high up there on what he was capable of handling. And he used a bar that would increase his range of motion when he came down to his chest. When I really screwed my back up, and this caused me years of pain and issues. They wanted to do surgery on it. They wanted to inject me with the cortisone shots. They wanted to do all that stuff, and I refused it. But when that happened, it was from overloading the range of motion on the deadlift by doing a deficit deadlift. And as you heard me talking about earlier, I already have an issue with getting to the bar properly on a deadlift. So then I was deadlifting. This day I had deadlifted, and then my accessory was deficit deadlifts.
Yep.
Probably not the smartest thing. It was in a cold gym. We were wearing hoodies and beanies and all that. Yep. It wasn't climate controlled, and that is what ended me competing seriously in powerlifting. So both of our pretty serious injuries came from overloading the range of motion, but you're still in favor of it.
Yeah, and so there's a time and a place. So in a cold warehouse, whenever you've had a history of hip and low back pain, probably not.
I didn't at that point, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say if, for me, I was overloading 2 of those variables.
Okay.
I was overloading, well, actually, it was supposed to be on a straight bar, and I had just gotten this new bar. I was so excited to use it. I'm training 2 other people, and I didn't adjust any of my training. And that's part of the reason that range of motion can be so useful is you can use less to get it. But if you screw it up, you're going to hurt yourself. And so I would say range of motion is probably it might actually be the most advanced way to increase your overloads. So like Dan Green, he'll pull flat, and then he'll pull 1.5 inches, I believe, and then he'll go all the way to a 3.5 inch deficit. And don't get me wrong, don't train like him. You will probably get hurt unless you're being trained by him, and because everyone has their art. But I overloaded the weight, so that's our bar weight is one technique, our range of motion is another, And so I think if you're loading one of those, it's fine. But as soon as you start to play with two or more of them, you're really running a high risk.
Yeah.
It's like, let's give my car a fuel boost and then let's take it out on a rainy day. Something's going to slip.
So, yeah, could you say that range of motion for beginners, if they want to kind of experience that and train that way, it may be better as an accessory?
Yes, undoubtedly. And I think we talked about this before the podcast as well. Don't go heavy. Don't try really hard at something you're doing for the first time. Like, you don't even know when you might slip. You need to learn where the pitfalls are before you go and try and get really good at it. Oh, you were talking about it with like your first, second, third week of max effort.
Yeah.
And then by the fourth week, you could actually hit something hard. Well, it's the same thing. Your body doesn't know how to move in that new position. Like, if you're grabbing groceries from the floor, you're not going to put yourself on a deficit and then go grab them. That's absolutely ludicrous. So, like, it's the same thing for a bench press. I'm not going to put myself up on a platform and then try to push myself up off the ground. Your body doesn't even know how to get in or out of that position, let alone with a heavy load. So if you're going to use range of motion, make sure you know what it feels like first, because that's where I screwed up for sure.
Well, what do you think increasing range of motion really does? Because if we're looking at it like from a muscle building standpoint, I don't see bodybuilders doing cambered bar bench presses and deficit deadlifts, and they have the most muscle in their frame. So what do you think extending the range of motion is even doing for a benefit?
Nervous system change. And so that's the biggest difference between a performance athlete and a muscle building type of athlete. Basically, anytime, it's like the idea of neuroplasticity, anytime that your body has to get into a new position, it's going to send new connections to that muscle, and it's going to get a deeper stretch. We'll say for the Duffalo bar. Sorry, I went to a specific example without giving it. As I go into that deeper stretch, that muscle becomes more accustomed to that new position. Now, when I go from that extended range of motion back down to my original range of motion, my body will likely feel safer and more comfortable in that position because that's not as far as it's gone.
Right.
That's why you prepare for something that's harder or worse than what you're going into.
So,
bodybuilders, they might not need it.
If you need a different stimulus, to me, he's making good arguments for increasing range of motion. I think if you need a bigger stimulus for a muscle group, just change the lift, like we talked about earlier.
For sure.
Like I think that's a safer, I think it's a smarter way to do it. I think it's going to have better muscle building benefits. And again, I'm not a top powerlifter, and I'm never going to be, a number one guy. So maybe a number one guy is going to have a different approach to something like that. But I think for the average gym goer, I think instead of doing deficit deadlifts, find something else that you can push your body in that's going to keep it in a safer position.
Average person, absolutely.
Yeah. There's a few more things that I think are worthy of discussing. What's your stance on cutting weight for meets?
Don't do what I do.
Let's talk about what you do then.
So I haven't competed in like 3 or 4 years, which is a whole different conversation. But I would basically get as much weight on my frame as I could, and then I would cut down from whatever the maximum amount of weight that I thought I could cut would be. The idea being that I could have a higher total at a lighter weight class. You have to have every single variable of your life under control to do that remotely safely. I don't know how Kevin Oak and Ben Polak do their water cuts so well, like 40 pounds. Your injury risk goes through the roof because you're depleted, and particularly your joints do not replete from the dehydration that you're going to incur.
Well, I think most of anybody who's watching this is probably not at the level of those two guys,
That's very fair.
right? So let's
Bring it back a little bit.
yeah, let's go back to, IPF and USAPL weight classes are now different than traditional powerlifting in America weight classes. But let's say let's say somebody's 215 pounds. They want to compete in 198s.
205s now, yeah.
Well, we're gonna go to traditional weight classes,
Okay.
so we'll call it 198s. If they were your client, what would you advise?
Said 213.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
213 to 198.
So if they are really advanced, 10% is the absolute highest amount that I'm comfortable with, and that's because I did about 13% myself, and it was pretty risky. So if I'm going to do that for somebody else or with someone else, I'm going to make it less of a risk because I wasn't that successful at any more than that. 5% is what I would say for most 24-hour weigh-ins. 2.5% for
2 hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You really can't, it needs to be like a big shit for a 2 hour weigh-in, and that's it. Otherwise, it's too much weight, and you're just really running a lot of risk.
All right. So I was hoping that you were going to go somewhere else with it.
All right.
And so I'm just going to go there.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I asked you a question just to hear myself talk. And so I don't think that unless you're at a national level meet, I don't think you should cut weight at all. And I've competed, back when the weight classes were 198, I've competed so many times at 202. And I didn't care. I didn't care because powerlifting and strength sports are an individual sport. And I always thought that getting in, my highest squat, I think, was 683. Getting in that squat at 202 and nailing it, to me, built the mental confidence that, yeah, if I cut 4 pounds and make 198s, I'm still going to nail that squat. Now, if I were to cut weight, it's another variable, right? So you're talking about risk of injury, but you're also talking about confidence. And then you're talking about fuel, right? So maybe I would have to restrict myself. And I wouldn't be able to eat what I wanted to eat to fuel, because this is a performance sport. So if you start to restrict yourself due to a weight class, and you're an amateur, I think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Like you're holding back so much, and you should never increase risk of injury or decrease your total based on fitting a weight class for a local meet.
Yes.
There's no competition there.
Agreed.
And if you're not first, and I don't mean to be condescending at that, but like in the grand scheme of competition, nowadays you have a 198er that'll squat, 700s. And so if you're squatting 500, which is still a phenomenal squat, but why cut weight for that? And I never made sense for that. The only meet that I've ever cut weight for was my last nationals. And I went from 215 to, the goal was 198. I ended up at 193 or 4, which meant I was able to eat going into the meet, which was a big variable because we were in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and going back into eating, of course, you're not going to eat, steak and rice. So I started eating a lot of carb and salt foods.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't get into my bench shirt.
Yep.
So my first 2 attempts, we couldn't even get the shirt all the way on. And I missed the 2 attempts. And luckily, my training partner at the time was able to keep cranking on the shirt between lifts, and we were able to get it all the way on for my last attempt, and I hit my opener. Okay?
So you left 2 lifts essentially there on the platform.
Yeah.
Because you missed your first 2.
Right. Now, luckily, my opener was still 75 pounds heavier than everybody else's.
Yeah.
Third. So that was the only lift I had some success in, and I barely got it. So to me, I've always found that it's just so much more risk involved in cutting, and it just never really made sense.
Yeah, and you kind of got to the basic concept of why someone would cut then. If you're just starting out, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. If there's not money or a QT on the table, if you can qualify in a lower weight class and then compete up a year later, okay, go ahead and cut. But that's not something a beginner is really worried about.
Right.
That's someone who's like an intermediate, and they know they're on the cusp of hitting something big.
Right.
If there's money on the line,
Different story.
completely different. I cut 20. Oh my god, I thought I was gonna die for the U.S. Open. I cut like 24 pounds in 6 days, and my wife Lexi was like carrying me out of an LA Fitness sauna, and we had flown, and I had to take Dramamine because I was getting sick, in like the amount of different variables. So like there was 30,000 potential, or there was a shitload of money for me, at least at the time.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I did it. If anyone endangers their own health, like, you need to really check your own ego, unless it's going to put, food on the table.
Yeah. And it's just sad because I never see anybody at a amateur level cut weight and hit their all-time best. Like, it's they work opposite of each other.
Yes.
Be comfortable, lift a couple pounds over your weight class, hit your best numbers, and then if you're really concerned about the weight class, come back, hit that same number 5 pounds lighter in the next weight class down.
Yep.
Right? It takes all the stress, and to me, I've always found like your strongest and your top guys are typically very muscular in strength sports, but I've always found that strength is more mental than anything else. And in order to build that mental stability, you have to continually build your confidence. And building your confidence largely has to do with having a successful track record. So if I want to hit a 500 or 600 pound squat, I'm better off doing it at 202 pounds and then coming back 6 months later and smoking it at 198 and working on my total for the rest of the movements. It just has never made sense to me, and I've followed that for the 12 years I've been lifting, 10 years competing. Like, it never clicked for me on why everybody does it. And when you try to talk them out of it, they look at you like you have three heads.
Well, if they don't think they're doing anything wrong, they don't really want to hear about.
They're almost all coached.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they have very, very poor coaching.
Yeah.
And local level coaching is not the greatest.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We'll leave that one there.
Yeah. So we'll talk. We don't. In comparison to your other lifts, you don't have the world's greatest bench press.
No.
Like your deadlift is impressive. Your squat is impressive. Your bench, due to injuries, mislifts, some other stuff. I feel like you've always kind of left some weight on the bar when it comes to your bench press.
Sort of. I think I got to get bigger if I want that to go up.
Well, to put things in comparison, your best squat was 765?
755, yep, at
Okay.
210.
Okay, so my best squat was raw. I didn't use wraps, but it was 562.
Yeah.
But I've benched 410 in meat.
Touche.
And that's pretty close to your best bench at 430.
Yeah. On that meat, 435 in comp.
So, in the grand scheme of things, I feel like your bench is probably the least impressive of the three.
100%.
So,
especially now.
Yeah, with the pec tear. But what movements would you say are best for building your bench press?
So, bodybuilders have it right. Building muscle in the chest, building muscle in the shoulders, building muscle in the triceps, and for the love of God, work your biceps. Like, there is no substitute for muscle mass on the upper part of the frame for the bench press. You can't out-arch a little muscle.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does any have any more significance than the other?
Exercise? Or
just like let's so we can talk about muscle group and then you can go into exercise.
Yeah. So when my bench was the best that I had it was actually before I competed. I weighed 160 pounds and benched like 350, and it was touch and go, but like, it's still double.
It's a lot of weight.
Yeah. And my squat was like 405. But my chest was big for 160, 170 pound kid,
right?
Whatever the heck I was, and like I did a lot of bodybuilding accessories. Like my shoulders were very capable. My overhead press was very strong. My pull-ups, very comfortable. I think symmetry is the biggest thing, and that's why bodybuilders are so good with the bench press. Is they've built everything around here because the bench isn't just your pecs.
Yeah.
It's not just your triceps. If those two are strong and your shoulders aren't, well, guess what? You can't actually use both of them because the shoulders are the mediator of the two.
Yeah, I've always found that movements that reverse the bench press tend to have a lot of success for me building the bench press.
Yeah.
So one of the machines that I like to use is the chest supported hammer strength machine.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always felt like when that's strong, when I'm using 3-4 plates on that on a consistent basis, I'm usually also pressing really well too.
Yep.
Now, obviously, you need to press to gain your press, right? But having a strong back can be so important for having a good press. Like, you don't often see somebody with a large back and a big yoke with a tiny bench press.
Yeah.
It's rare. So that chest supported like dumbbell rows and barbell rows I've found are really, the big keys. So in geared lifting, we always said like the lats were really important for a geared bench press. But for raw benching, I feel like it's just slightly up a little bit further because you're not tucking as hard. So I feel like the upper shelf of the body is very important for gaining a good bench press, and that includes the shoulder.
Yeah, and like the lat technically goes from the hip almost all the way up to the neck. And so like it's a higher portion of the lat, but the trap, the rear delt,
Rhomboids. Yeah.
rhomboids and serratus are super important because you talked about the oppositional muscles. Opposing, that would be the word.
That's okay.
Yeah. But the more that you can control it on the way down, the more likely you are to have success on the way up.
Yeah.
So you nailed it. Like that upper middle back, like you see like that big girthy middle back. Like dude's probably got a good bench press.
Yeah.
You're also probably miring a little too much from the way that I said it, but he's probably got a good bench press.
Yeah. I think that again, like anything that is the same motion, whether it's a pressing movement with dumbbells and barbells, right? Obviously, that's going to help. But anything pulling in that same motion is just training the body to be successful in that pattern, in that movement pattern. And I think it's very important to build a good bench press that way.
Oh, for sure. And one little piece that you mentioned is chest supported. With the bench press, you're not supposed to be moving your hips a whole lot. So if you can take your hips out of it, it's going to have a much higher translation to your bench.
Yeah.
Like that's a really important little piece to keep in mind.
So there's an old equipment manufacturer that was out of Millville, New Jersey, and it's kind of a woodsy South Jersey area. We had in our little mini gym, we had a chest supported row from them. It was called Scorpion was the brand. And it was kind of like hammer strength before hammer strength. So it was leverage equipment, but you could tell it was 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, it was old stuff. But the way they did it in the pivot points of the weights, you had to put your feet behind you, but your chest was still on the pad.
Oh, you had like no help then from the rest
Zero
of your body.
stabilization.
Old machines are so hard.
The first time I used it, I woke up in the middle of the night because my traps were spazzing. Like all my lower trap was actually spazzing. That's how much it hurt.
That's awesome.
And it was all, yeah. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Obviously, it was annoying that I woke up from it. But just taking my feet out of the equation and how much pressure that put on my back when I did it.
Exact
and,
idea.
And taking the body English out. And of course, I was still going heavy on it. And it just it was an amazing machine. And it just doing that taught me a lot about how I train now. We don't have that machine anymore. But it was a cool experience. So, a couple more things that I kind of want to talk about. So, what's your stance on cardio for strength athletes?
That's a really, really, really good question. And you will see all kinds of information about it. From my Penn State education, we learned about the inhibition of different hormones or enzymes that come into play when doing cardiovascular at a high level or strength training at a high level. And they do directly interfere with one another. I'm meaning in terms of intensity, particularly for cardio.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't walk up the stairs, your cardio is inhibiting your strength training. You need to be in good enough shape that you're not winded after you load the freaking bar.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think you're going to do a 2-mile run and then the next day you're going to hit a big squat, you're out of your mind. And you probably don't think that if you've got above a 500 or 600 pound squat, unless you're like a Saquon Barkley or some shit like that, because I just don't get those superhumans. But for the rest of us, you got to minimize it a bit.
Would you say it's kind of like a seesaw?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that didn't dawn on me until about 2015 or 16.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I was doing a lot of sets of 20 on squats. And
God, you hate yourself.
you just you like to find different ways to punish yourself. So I was doing sets of 20, and I wasn't completing my sets. Not because of muscle fatigue. I was out of breath.
Yep.
I couldn't hack it on the lungs. So I started running. Well, not only was I getting my sets of 20, but I was working up to 4 sets of 20 at 325, beltless, right? So the first set's easy, but once you get all that blood in the muscle and you're still able to crank out those 20 rep sets, it's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Like that, nothing made me feel more manly than those sets.
I can see it.
But it was just amazing that my lungs were what was holding me back.
Well, you know, one of the cardiovascular adaptations, it's like the Frank Sterling principle, not to get in too deep here, but the stroke volume, or the amount of output of blood that your heart can produce for every single squeeze. That's ultimately what's going to hold you back on those sets. The thing is, if you're looking at a 1 rep, that is not what's going to hold you back.
Yeah.
So 20 rep sets, that makes sense, but you probably would have hit a limit at a certain point, maybe 385 after weeks and weeks and weeks.
Very, very true. I tried to do it with 365, and I couldn't even get close. I was doing 12 to 15 rep sets.
And that's the total volume is just too high. Mm-hmm. Eventually, that becomes too stressful. And that's where the seesaw comes into play. Realistically, what you're balancing is stress. And when that weightlifting goes up, or that amount of tonnage, I believe is what we were going to use for our volume today, goes up, so does your stress. So where does this part of the seesaw have to go?
Right.
It has to come down. Now, as you start to run, okay, you just have to keep playing that seesaw. 20 rep sets, that's a lot more like running, which is more specific to your transition. But for 1 rep, that's barely even a step.
So how would you implement cardio for somebody who wants to get strong? Or would you at all?
I don't. And I argue with myself because I think it's a fear of doing something wrong. I think that's one of the hardest parts of coaching, actually, is, am I doing everything for my athlete's success? And I don't do it for people that are really serious about their strength training. For people that I work with, a lot of people in pain.
Okay.
I do actually have them do some, and that's for a very different reason. But in terms of overall brute strength, I think
not even HIIT training,
especially not HIIT training.
Okay.
Because again, HIIT much higher on the seesaw for stress. So where does our weight training or our muscle building have to go? It's always, if it's a seesaw, they're competitive. And so if you're competing against someone who's at the same skill level as you, are you going to have to try really hard to win, or are you going to have to not try at all? And that's the same thing with doing all of that stressful cardio and trying to do that stressful weightlifting, is you're going to have to try so freaking hard, it's probably impossible.
Could we circle back to what we just talked about with cutting weight? And say that may be a contributor?
Total stress. Yeah.
People try to do cardio. They try to melt themselves with the trash bags.
Mm-hmm. That was well done.
Do you think that could have an influence?
I would say it does have an influence. And again, you're looking at the total stress on your system. And it's just like, we can circle back even further. Range of motion and adding weight. Now it's not one variable you're manipulating, it's two, and that's more total stress. So ultimately, you always come back to the same seesaw for training. And as you get more and more experienced, I think that's what you realize is like that seesaw also includes your life. It includes, oh, I just had a kid. Like, that seesaw never stops, and there's nothing that doesn't get to end up on the seesaw. It's a bitch of a playground.
That's fair. Okay. So powerlifting is made up of squatting, benching, and deadlifting. And anybody with a powerlifting background tends to find one of those movements as the most important, right? What do you think is the most impressive feat of strength? And it doesn't have to be one of those three. It could be anything.
The most impressive feat of strength. That's a really good question that I have not actually thought about. I'll tell you what, I don't think it's powerlifting. The most impressive feat of strength would be somewhere in strongman.
Because it involves more than something so direct and specific.
Yeah. Like a squat, that barbell is made to stay on your back. An Atlas stone? I can't even reach around it.
Yeah.
Like, and you're picking up a 500-pound stone? Are you kidding me?
And you're moving.
Yeah. So now,
have
we
to
talked about that
stabilize it.
seesaw.
Yeah.
You're going to pull a 50,000-pound truck. That is cardio that is weighted. What in the world are you doing?
Yeah, I've always found that anybody that competes at a high level of strongman is just a freak.
Yeah.
Like, you're just an absolute freak. And not only in size, like, obviously, you know, Brian Shaw and Thor and all them guys are just massive human beings. But that is, like, the ultimate test of fitness to me. And because I'm strength biased, right? So, obviously, endurance, if you're endurance biased, you're going to say CrossFit. Because there's a more endurance aspect to it. Now, to me, for me, it's more of a lift specific thing. So when I think of, like, if I'm scrolling through Instagram or if I'm, you know, in the gym and I see somebody overhead pressing a lot of weight, I'm like, that dude's a freak. And I'm not talking dumbbells, I'm talking barbell over the head with good form. Whether it's a push press or a strict press,
just
it doesn't
over
matter.
The head.
Yeah, getting that weight over the head. And to me, that's a lift that I've always struggled at. I've never done well. I've never gone far into the 200s. So when I see somebody doing 225 for reps or 275 or 315 for reps, I'm like, that guy's just a different breed.
Yeah.
I find it to just be largely impressive.
And along those lines, then, like, if we had to give it one lift, my first thought was like an OHP. And it's partially because you're pushing something above your head, and that's the most unstable position that the human body has. Our shoulders are meant for multi-direction. They're not, so the more range of motion that an area has, the less stability. There's an inverse relationship. That's at every single joint. This thing can move in a ball. That means it can move every direction. How much stability does that have?
Yeah.
None.
Right.
And you're going to push a 300-pound circus dumbbell up in the air. You lunatic, you absolutely amazing lunatic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's squats. It's high rep squats.
High rep?
High rep. It's not the 1 rep max. Because, like, yeah, shit can go down, of course. But in 1 rep,
So you think somebody squatting, I think maybe like 5 years ago, there was a whole bunch of, like, strength athletes that did the 20 rep 500-pound challenge.
Yeah, and that just came back around here
Did
for
it?
quarantine, like a 405 challenge or something.
They dropped it 100 pounds in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Sounds right.
They want more people to participate.
Well, that was actually the idea.
Well, I don't want to see that, though.
I mean, you don't want to see it.
I want to see the freaks.
Yeah. I agree. Steroids in baseball, yeah.
Hey. Where were we on that?
Yeah, that got off the tracks fast. But like squats for reps.
Yeah, so have you ever watched in person Ray Williams squat?
No, I have not had the pleasure.
Yeah, so I've gotten to watch him squat 2 or 3 times now. There's nothing like watching that man squat 1,000 pounds raw.
Oh, Raw Nationals, I got to see it.
Yeah, so you did get to see.
Yeah,
it.
everyone was on their feet.
The atmosphere,
It's unbelievable.
Like, it's just his presence. Like it gives you chills. He does stuff that no man was doing at the time, and I don't know if anybody's done it since. At least not raw like that. At least not in a tested federation. And it just absolutely phenomenal. I would pick that over, another guy doing 500 for 20. Just because it's such a phenomenal feat of strength, and nobody's really done it.
Well, and I think the flip side of that coin is no one has done it. So that makes it seem something almost like
Superhuman.
Yeah, like mysterious. What I love, and this is like completely opinion, like there's no feat of strength that is better than the other, except for CrossFit. That's lower, but I'm just kidding. But when I see someone dig into like a 6, 7, 8, 9 rep area, that weight's heavy as shit.
Yeah.
That is probably what you should be training for 2 or 3 reps, according to the percentage of your 1 rep max.
Like if we're looking at Powerlifting table?
That's a really good example of how to do it. But you're going to dig that deep. Like, that person's got grit. 1 rep, it's easy. Training singles, no problem. But digging into a set 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 reps, that's where some balls are found.
Are you big on Powerlifting stable?
Do you use it? Start.
Yeah.
And then I like to transition into RPE once people understand it. And I use RPE in a very everything I do is bastardized.
It's a system that works for you and your clients.
Yes.
And that's the most important part, is that you know why you're implementing it.
Yes.
I've always been big on Powerlifting stable. And that's because, I don't know if you remember Nick Mercurio.
Yeah.
He's the one that taught me how to use it. He gave me an hour rundown and sent me on my way.
Yep.
So I've always used it mostly to start. But I did something called it's a form of block periodization, but I always called it step periodization, where you moved percentages per week instead of a linear wave.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so you might go 80, 85, 90, and then, you might have a deload week, and then you might be like 81, 86, 91.
Yep.
And you might move like that. If we're looking at raw percentages of training, where do you find that people build the most strength in the percentage range?
So it goes by experience level. If you are we're just going to give this super general, like 5 years and under, I would say the 60 to 80% range, because you're going to get the stimulus for your nervous system as well as that muscular aspect, like physiologically for both. As you become more and more experienced, those training loads are too destructive. And you just take too much tonnage in one session to recover from. So again, our seesaw becomes unbalanced. So now it turns into the 3, the 2, the 1 rep maxes. And that's actually why I didn't do that well, is I never accommodated that. I always wanted to do the 5, 6, 7, 8 reps. I didn't want to do singles and doubles. I think it's kind of boring, to be honest. But that's where the more experienced, higher total, higher strength performance athletes will get the most strength. If you want muscle building, keep it a little bit lighter, obviously.
I've always found that training between 80 and 90 was the ultimate way to build strength.
Yep.
And that's even not beginners, but like once you're through that beginner stage and you have the movements down.
Yeah, once you know how to do the movement.
Yeah, properly. That you build the most strength within that range. Now, if you look at Powerlifting table, I believe 80% is 20 reps, so you can do mostly 4x5 or 5x4 is usually how that's divided. I believe 90%.
It's down to
I think it's
triples the most.
I think
like
it's
1 to 2s.
6 reps
Total.
6 reps total.
Yep.
So usually
like a 3x2,
you're
a 2x3.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure.
I think you're right.
So I just find that those rep ranges make sense to me. And aside from that, I feel like you have enough stimulus to build muscle, and you're able to recover, right? And then your risk of injury is relatively low.
Yep.
And that's a big part of it. So we talked about longevity, right? Most people, when they become experts in their sport, they're older.
Yep.
And now we know that, training in these rep ranges tend to have less risk. and you're able to continue to perform the movement properly. So for me personally, I just feel that if you want to be strong, you need to train in the 80 to 90% range.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and there's a reason why too. It's nervous system dominance in strength sports, so it's how well are you familiar with that territory. And if you're trying to get a little bit bigger, the muscle building aspect is going to be a little bit better with those like 60 to 80% ranges. So like a power builder might stick in there a little bit more. And this would be even an in-season, off-season conversation. So,
Fair.
yeah, like sets of 6 to 8 as you're like...
We can say that about variation too, right?
Yes,
Like,
it's another form of variation.
Yeah. But no, I mean like variation as far as in-season, off-season.
Yeah.
Like, so can we just, in 1 minute, let's make, well, not 1 minute, because I never do anything that fast. Can we just make a very simple, generalized program?
Yeah.
I think we can.
Yeah.
Right? So off-season, you're going to do a compound movement, and it's going to rotate.
Yeah.
Right? So a compound rotating movement could be hack squats, could be front squats, could be safety bar squats, right? So you're going to rotate through that stuff. You're going to hit your accessories with some volume. You might work up to top sets. If you're really weak in that pattern, you're probably not going to do top sets. You might do more volume at one weight because that's what's going to take for you to master
volume
the movement.
Over intensity, yeah.
Yep. And when you're in prep for strength, or when you want to peak and test out and be the strongest that you can be, you're going to increase specificity.
Yep.
And then you're going to decrease all the extra stuff.
Yep.
And as you get even closer, you're going to start ruling out your variations, right? So, like, if you start prep, you may not be doing hack squats as your first movement, right? Like, that doesn't quite make sense. So now you're getting more specific.
Yes.
But you might be using different bar variations, right? But as you get closer to that meet, you're using more of a straight bar, and you're becoming more specific on what you're actually competing in.
Yeah. That's dead on.
And you're decreasing your accessory work to increase your recovery and maximize being able to take advantage of the heavy loads.
100%.
Why does there have to be anything more than that?
Doesn't have to be until you get to a certain point.
To a certain point.
Yep. Either the very lowest, where you're in a rehab setting, or the very highest, when you're looking for that top 3 total, that world record. Those two spectrums have the same styles of training, in my opinion.
Okay.
Everything else...
Because it has to be so detailed.
Yep.
So, last question before we wrap it up. If you had to pick... if you had to pick something, and it was either programming or environment, which one would you pick for strength sports?
I'd say environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
My biggest years for strength training happened when I was competing 198, just starting. I went from like a 1450 total to a 1750 in 18 months.
You actually out-totaled me. So I came in second at 198s. You out-totaled me at 181. It was crazy impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was just like, more weight. But that was because the guys I was training with were all massive. So I trained with 4 to 6 people. And in Central PA, again, we're all corn-fed. We don't have a lot of other stuff to do. So, yeah, we're going to lift some weights. One guy was 6'1", 314 pounds. Another was 5'10", 320 pounds, and he almost benched 600. There was another that I don't even know what his actual body weight is, but he was 6'6".
But when you're just having like training sessions, you're not competing, you're not testing, like you're just training to get better. You don't put yourself in different weight classes.
We're about to go to the "there's no weight classes in the jungle" quote. Yeah, I know, right? But no, like you see things that if you're 150 pounds less in body weight, you would never think that 600 pounds is even possible at first. But having that influence of just seeing 500, 600, 700 pound lifts, it makes it seem so much less daunting.
I just like to compete. So for me,
Yeah.
environment is way more important than programming, because we're talking about variation, we're talking about all these different percents and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you're deadlifting, let's say that's the movement of the day, and you're going into deadlift, and everybody's deadlifting, you don't want to be the guy they have to strip the plates off for. They don't want to strip off the plates either, especially big guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I think environment is very important. My senior year, I walked up to our super heavyweight. I don't know if you met him. And I walked up to him, and I knew I was competing in 198s. And I said, I'm going to out-total you this year. And everybody laughed at me. I out-totaled him.
Mm-hmm.
I would have out-totaled him either way, but he did bomb out. So,
I feel for him.
yeah. But, to just kind of end that, I think environment, gym environment, if you want serious results, you have to train at serious gyms.
Yep.
You have to be in the right mindset, and you have to be okay with pushing yourself to a peak level.
Yes.
And that's on a daily basis. I mean, you don't have to push yourself to the point where you can't recover. That's stupid.
Yes.
But you have to push your body. In order for you to constantly progress, you got to take it one little mini step further every single time you're in the gym. And same thing with calories when you're bulking or when you're dieting. It's just less than before or more than before. So this is fun.
Yeah, I agree.
I had so much stuff saved up to talk to you about. So I'm glad we got this one out of the way. I think this is by far our longest one, and hopefully Rebecca has any memory cards left. So if people wanted to contact you to either follow you or for coaching, where would you suggest that they go?
Shoot me an email, Steven at Teeters Strength and Wellness. Our website is very close to being finished as well. So if you go onto my Instagram page, Steven Teeters, TSW, you'll see some of my old lifts, not so much new stuff, and there's a link to our website in there as well.
Perfect. So, guys, if you're paying attention to these podcasts, give Steven a follow. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's a very strong person himself, so he's been through it. So, thanks, guys.